Good to see you here, Lo.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to talk about a bunch of things, but first out of the rumors on the street, we can start with that first. So you're with GV, but apparently there's talk about you spinning off a new fund, focusing on diversity and investing in seed funds led by people of color and women, and we raised close to $50 million. True?
I cannot comment, but that is a good overview.
Okay. Well, let's start with that, right? So we all get to see a lot of stats and data on diversity and or a lack thereof. But what we don't get to see or we don't get to talk about much is why is it important, right? So let's start with that. I mean, so why do you think it's important to have diversity, especially in venture firms and venture capital or access to capital?
I think that when you look at the business side of the equation, the ability to be able to incorporate diversity into strategies, we know that based on data, a lot of folks have done data, probably some of the most widely cited is from McKinsey around the effectiveness of companies. I think theirs was focused more on large public companies, but the data shows that when you have a diverse group of executives, a diverse board, that the performance of a company is better. So there's a business case to be made that's tough to argue with based on the data. I think also if you think about the changing demographics that we're seeing, the United States by the year 2040 or so is going to change from, change into a majority-minority country. I mean, we've already seen certain states flip, like California. So the ability to be able to have a representation of employees that are the composition, or reflective of the composition of your target markets is very important. There's one thing that we've learned as investors that is also really interesting. So it's this thought around, and if you think about it from the perspective of investors, we noticed when I was at GV that as we were trying to get additional deal flow, that people of color and women have an indirect or a non-traditional path to venture, and therefore as a result they pick up these really unique networks, number one, and then number two, they also have a really interesting perspective or lens to be able to apply to certain opportunities. And at the seed stage, that's important because the ability to be able to find something that not a lot of folks are trying to go after, to price it up, to allow a point of entry on the investing side that allows for a nice return, but also the ability to have insight into a market based on familiarity before there's an abundance of data can lead to a nice return if it's something that's not obvious to mainstream Sand Hill Road. So based on that insight, GV partnered with a lot of these seed stage funds led by a woman or a person of color, and then as a result was able to successfully get deal flow that was put into the pipeline for consideration by G, which invests downstream from seed investors. So there's without question, in addition to I think some important societal issues that are addressed with increasing diversity in the entire ecosystem, I think maybe leading is the ability to recognize there's an important business case to be made as well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because it's not just a view of it's the right thing to do. It's actually offers you a competitive advantage.
That's right.
And if you ignore it, you're really losing that advantage.
That's 100% correct. I mean, I can think of so many different examples that are companies that are very successful. I'll give one quick example. There's a company called Maven. And Maven was founded by an entrepreneur named Deshaun Amara. He grew up in Oakland. I grew up in Oakland. He went to Hampton University. I went to Hampton University. And he had this insight around hair extensions for women. Hair extensions are a fixture in the African American community, but more recently there has been a lot of crossover into other ethnicities as well. So he taught himself Mandarin to go to China to be able to go directly to the sources. The main sources for hair extensions are China, India, and Brazil.
Right.
If you just think about you need a lot of hair, it has to be kind of straight, able to be bleached in a myriad of different colors. So he went to China, negotiated with suppliers, was able to cut out the people that distribute it. And then what he did is in the African American communities, most people get their hair extensions from a beauty supply store. So the stylists send their customers to a beauty supply store, and then the customer buys the hair, brings it back, the stylist installs it. The stylist doesn't see any economics as a result of that. So what Deshaun did is he created an app to be able to allow the stylist to show their customers on their iPhone or iPad many more different styles, kind of like the Amazon endless inventory model. And then since he got better economics by removing two pieces out of the supply chain, the distributors and the beauty supply stores, he was able to share the economics with the stylists. So now the stylists have an incentive to use his product, and they're making more money. So there's a little bit of societal good is there as well, because the stylists now make more money. So he took that model up and down Sand Hill Road, and he and I talked about this one day. We sat down at Phil's Coffee and then ended up at the Battery for 4 hours talking about this. He was literally laughed out of the offices of a lot of the prominent Sand Hill Road firms that invest at seed. And but he was able to, there's a couple of African American funds, Eric Moore at Base, a Core Innovation Capital, a lady named Kat, and he was able to raise his seed round from them. I'm an investor as well, personal investor. And then, along comes Ben Horowitz from Andreessen Horowitz. Ben, for those who don't know, grew up in Berkeley, California. Ben is married to an African-American woman. And so he got the market. So when he saw that, he was like, oh, this is amazing, I'm in. And so then, just like the lemmings that we are, all the VCs that laughed Deshaun out of the office, no, Deshaun, let us in the deal too, and Deshaun was like, but you laughed at me. Yeah, but we never said no. So just...
Who's laughing now?
Exactly. So the company's doing very well, and it's just one example of kind of just having that insight into the market to understand the opportunity.
I met a very interesting entrepreneur and investor lately on my recent trip to Tel Aviv. I just came back. And one of the things she told me is that, see, as an investor, and I'm an investor myself, that you're taught to recognize patterns and connect dots and look at repeatable metrics which lead to a certain result. And the problem is that the lack of diversity and the lack of engagement from people of color and women in tech scenes and startups and venture sort of eliminate them from those patterns. And as a result, so it's sort of like it's a vicious cycle, right?
Very true.
So even when you are a seasoned investor, and you could potentially be a woman yourself, you could be a general partner who's a woman, but you're now looking at patterns which don't involve those consequences. And so as a result, you feel that those opportunities are less likely to be successful. So I think that's the sort of so someone has to start something, and I think that's why I know you can't talk about it, but I think Plexo seems like a great bold step. Without those bold steps, that logjam can't be removed. So I'm really excited about that. Before we go on to the next one, I want to talk a little bit about so general GV, and may wanna or may not want to go into too much into Plexo, but are there any particular aspects you want to call out and say, okay, well, here's how we offer a unique or a disproportionate proportionate value to based on sort of how we operate as a fund or how we function as a firm? Anything that calls out?
Sure, I'll definitely do the quick elevator pitch on GV. So GV is the early stage investing unit for Alphabet, the holding company for Google. GV, formerly Google Ventures, at this stage, well over $4 billion in assets under management and about 400 plus active portfolio companies. Unlike most corporate venture units, GV thinks and compares itself to and behaves more like a traditional financially focused venture fund like an Andreessen Horowitz, Benchmark, KP, Sequoia, as opposed to an Intel Capital, Salesforce, or like a GE Ventures, where the objective for those units are to identify opportunities that align back with the mothership, maybe fill a product gap or give access to a new technology or provide some partnering early that allows them to be in pole position for a downstream M&A event. So GV is focused mainly on investing just like a normal Sand Hill Road fund. Invest typically Series A, like checks of $5 million up to about $25 million or so, depending. There are a few exceptions, and some of those have been in the news lately. And has a unique structure, so it's an operating partner model, so 70 employees approximately, with about 17 investing partners and about 45 operating partners. So partners that have vertical expertise functionally in areas like product engineering, marketing, recruiting, corporate development. A lot of different things that if you think about an entrepreneur and what they face on a daily basis, at the board meetings, and if there's certain financing events or M&A events or big partnerships, I mean, that's when, or strategy things, the investor typically gets involved. But having an operating partner model allows us to help the entrepreneurs with things they face on a more daily basis or a cadence of increased frequency. So things such as, hey, I got to hire a lead engineer, I've got to prioritize my product roadmap, or I need to think about how I'm going to rebrand our website and mobile app. So it allows us to have a unique value proposition in addition to actually financing the companies. So I think that's very additive. I mean, we also have expertise in design, and a lot of entrepreneurs have called that out, that we've helped them think through their information architecture, their user experience, their branding, their pricing models, things of that nature. So I think that's a unique way to be able to differentiate dollars in a very competitive market. And I think what you alluded to with Plexo Capital, I mean, that is true. And what we're trying to do is to really leverage these unique networks and insights that people of color and women have who lead seed stage funds to allow us to not only invest into them to generate returns, but then also in parallel to invest in some of the best companies that come out of their portfolios as well. And the goal is to be able to have a unique LP base for Plexo Capital that can augment the value that those GPs we've invested into are providing and give kind of a different vector of value so that we can build a relationship directly with the entrepreneur to then hopefully get a direct allocation in the next round of funding.
Great. So I'm going to pivot a little bit.
Sure.
So keeping the topic of diversity alive, but what we all know, I mean, I think it's obvious that there's just aren't enough people of color and women in tech and startups. But certainly there's a raised awareness, and we have the knowledge, at least, and sensitivities around it. And in light of that, there's a lot of movements happening lately. Me Too, big movement. And in light of that, NVCA has recently updated its code of conduct, and that's been very well publicized. And so, as a venture capitalist yourself, I would love to understand from you, well, maybe if you could help us understand, or really sort of, what are the big takeaways from those that policy update, and what's sort of the response been, maybe at GV, but also in the venture capitalist community around some of those policies that have come out?
Well, I think at GV, what I can say is that we're looking to fund the best entrepreneurs possible, and we recognized early that casting a wider net is a good thing, which is why we partnered with a lot of the seed stage funds led by a woman or a person of color. We knew that we didn't have access to all the networks that were going to generate interesting deal flow, and closed networks don't have a monopoly on access to the best deals. I think that a lot of the narrative that we're seeing today is very positive. I think, within the last month and a half or 2 months, we've seen NEA announce a new female partner. Lightspeed
did.
First Round, maybe Greylock. Probably missing one more. GV. Because we got Jess Verrilli back from Twitter.
There you go.
So there you go. So that's at least 5, if not more. I think I would also like to see, people of color, particularly underrepresented minorities, added into that. But to answer your question, I believe that because of the narrative, we are seeing an increased focus right now on how we can diversify our industry, which is a good thing. Again, I go back to the business portion, which is, you get into new networks that way. We're also seeing, and I've heard this anecdotally, that a lot of entrepreneurs are looking at the composition of the makeup of the partnership to really determine whether or not that's the type of fund that they want to work with. Does that fund reflect the values of females or people of color as they're trying to build a certain type of organization? Typically, you want to align yourself with people that have similar values, and if you're looking at a funder that only is one-dimensional in terms of the composition of its team, I mean, that might not be the best partner. So I think that definitely is the case. I'm excited about it because I believe that it's past due for our industry, and it just leads to better business returns. It's just good business.
Yeah, it makes better business sense. I mean,
100%.
that point can't be understated.
Exactly.
When you align incentives, I mean, it should make sense to everyone. I mean, on that point, right, so there was a recent talk, Samuel Shah had done this talk about availability of capital and sort of a comparison between seed and A, and certainly the point there was, well, it's especially lately, like 2017, early 2018, there's been a lot of capital floating around, and it's been easy to raise a seed round. But for an exception is for the URMs or the underrepresented minorities, that's not the case. If you could talk a little bit about sort of like, do you really feel that there is actually a climate that prevents the URMs to benefit from this availability, and why is that?
Yeah, so definitely, based on the numbers, we know that that's true, right? Because we don't see the numbers reflecting the demographics. So what I can say is that, in particular, going back to the thought around networks, a lot of people that are starting companies who are URM, or even females, I mean, they don't necessarily have access to being 1 degree removed from someone. So, I mean, I can't even begin to say how many inbounds I receive over the transom, whether it be Twitter, it's mainly LinkedIn. Every now and then it's Instagram, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Not the best way to contact me.
The younger crowd.
Yeah. I've even gotten a couple of texts, which is pretty scary. But folks don't have access to the networks, and so I do my best.
Right.
I did it a lot better before I got to GV, but I do my best to try and be helpful. And just responding even if it's a no, sometimes I'll say, it's not a good fit for us. Why don't you look at this fund, or why don't you check out Crunchbase and do this type of search? And people are just so grateful that I'm even just responding, because they don't have access and they're spraying and praying without success, of course. So I mean, that's one thing. When you think about the way that investors receive access to most deals, I mean, we go hunt. So if we have a particular investment thesis, we'll go hunt and try and identify entrepreneurs that fit within that thesis, whether that be at conferences or whether we might see an article, and then we'll reach out. But as I'm sure you're aware, as everyone in this room is aware, this is a relationship business. So
it is.
The majority of the deals, they are typically referred in, whether that be from an entrepreneur that we've worked with in the past, which is actually the best source of deal flow. I mean, it's amazing how entrepreneurs just have that ability to be able to sniff out someone that has similar characteristics to themselves. So that's typically the best source of deal flow, an entrepreneur that we've backed before, or an entrepreneur that sometimes we passed on but kept a close relationship with.
Well, that was the whole pattern recognition I was talking about. So that's where the logjam needs to be broken, because you're looking for that pattern that you're comfortable with, and that includes the people you funded before. Yeah,
and here's the thing. I have received referrals from white male entrepreneurs for URM and female, and so then it's a question of, is the entrepreneur able to get to the person who's close to me, who I trust? And so that's where I see the challenge. It's just because a lot of these folks just are not in those networks. Now some are, right? So I've seen I'm working on a deal right now It's led by an African-American woman, and she came out of a well-known Silicon Valley startup. You know, she knows all the right people and was able to get to me. So, you know, there are those edge cases. But, you know, again, kind of if you think about how these things work and what that pattern recognition looks like, I mean, what we're talking about right now, the prototypical model is someone that was maybe leading product or business development or an engineering team at a well-known Google, Facebook, Twitter, or an Airbnb, you know, Uber, Lyft, you know, one of those, you know, Slack. Right? So you have to kind of be in there. And then we also know that the numbers for those companies are all, for the most part, kind of sub 10% in terms of URM. And, you know, females are a little bit better, but not much. Right? So if the pattern recognition today for the prototypical model is a PM out of Facebook, well, how many URM PMs are there at Facebook? I know one. Actually, I know two. I know two. So
it's pretty stark.
Yeah, so you're not just you're just not going to see that deal flow, or you know, you've got an entrepreneur from Cincinnati, Ohio that's working on something, and you know, how are they going to get to me? Well, they're probably going to reach out on LinkedIn because they just are not 1 degree removed from my network. Me, low Toney, me, or me, a VC at a, you know, a top tier fund.
Sure. You know. Great points there. So, I mean, we should talk about stats a little bit because they're very, very stark and revealing. So, the Information magazine recently published their Future List study, and they conducted it well, you know, with social capital on diversity at VC, and they found that 92% of the senior investors in the top tier firms are male, and 78% are white. And they also found that almost 25% have all white male managers, I mean, in entirety. And I mean, it's pretty stark. I mean, this is 2018. So I don't know if you had a chance to read this study or not, but were you, I mean, number one, were you surprised? And do you think things have changed over the last few years much at all? And I want to talk about your personal side because, you know, you're pretty unique. I mean, you know, as your personal experience as a person of color to enter a very white male-dominated industry, what are your perspectives on the stats and if things are changing at all?
So I grew up in Oakland, only child to a single parent mother. Went to a historically black college, Hampton University, and I went to Cal for business school. And when I was at Cal, I learned about venture capital because I was fortunate enough to go to a school where VCs came in. I didn't really know a lot about VC, even though I was interested in tech. And I was eager beaver and went up to them and said, hey, how do I become like you? And by the way, it was all, to my recollection, it was all white male VCs that came through in my 2 years there. And they told me, hey, you know, why don't you go be a PM? Because if you're a product manager, that playbook is basically the same playbook as early stage VC, which is very true. That was sage advice a long time ago before it was PMs were the de jure choice for venture capital. Go run a big P&L if you can, and then go be a CEO of a venture-backed company. And so I set out to do those things. But while I was still at Cal, I mean, I used to.
Great advice, by the way.
It was very good advice. It was very. I was lucky. I was lucky. And one of the things I would do is I would just go and look at the websites of all the different venture funds. And, you know, I was hard pressed to see, at that time in particular, to see anyone that wasn't a white male that went to Harvard or Stanford. You know, they had like the NYU, Chicago, sprinkled in every now and then. But for the most part, that was the industry. I mean, it didn't deter me. I just, because, you know, as a person of color, as a black man, I mean, that's been my life, my whole life, right? I've always been like the only one, you know, or one of two. So, I mean, you know, it's the reality. Things have changed a little bit. You know, I see glimmers of hope generationally. Like I look at the generation ahead of me and my mentor, you know, and has always been the only one. I look at my generation, there's a few more. But then I have hope for the generation behind me because now now that I'm graybeard, I go to these conferences and, or silver fox, or when I go to these conferences, what I see is, I see way more diversity than I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
Particularly when I go to Los Angeles or New York, both in terms of people of color and women. So I have glimmers of hope behind me that, and I think there's more awareness now
Definitely.
within our communities.
Yeah,
I didn't
for
know
sure.
about venture capital until I got to grad school. And now I get pinged by people that are in undergrad. I participated in this program called HBCU VC. So there's much more awareness now. So I'm hopeful for those behind us being able to change. I'm also hopeful for the mindset more broadly within the generations behind us of being more open and accepting.
Totally. A lot to hope for.
Yes.
Yeah, very exciting. We could talk all day.
We
But
could.
the timer's at 0.
All right.
So we're going to end. But awesome.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Good luck.
Yeah.
Thank you.